Hello everyone, in this video we're going to be continuing our 0 to Ace series. This is again the basic flight training. We're not doing anything sophisticated, that'll come a little bit later on. But we're going to be going ahead and taking a look at the Yak 52 and some emergencies that are going to come up to you a lot, unfortunately, in flight. Especially once you start doing the actual combat side of things. So we've set up our standard mission. It's the exact same one we had from last time. Nothing special going on in any way. The only difference, however, is I've reduced the temperature a little bit outside, so I don't have to complain as much. You guys don't have to listen to me complaining about the thing overheating the whole time. And we'll be practicing a couple different emergencies that, again, I highly recommend that you try yourself. So let's go ahead now, bring ourselves over to the mission itself. Alrighty then, looks pretty good. A little bit colder outside for sure. We're going to press start. And get everything kind of kicked off here. There we go. Winter. Haha, no more complaining. So the first emergency we're going to do is we're going to do what happens when the engine dies during takeoff. Now, there's a bunch of different times this is going to happen. Now, if you're in a twin-engine airplane, this could be a real problem. If you're in a single-engine airplane, it's not too bad. We've got plenty of runway behind us. If something bad happens, I'm not going to worry about it too much because, again, we're in invincible mode, so things shouldn't get too bad. So let's go ahead and get ready for this one. Everything is looking pretty good as far as controls goes. Everything's nice and smooth. I've got all the stuff that needs to be opened properly, and we should be good to roll. So what we're going to do is we're going to simulate an engine failure during the initial roll. So I'm going to go ahead and go at full power. All you basically need to do is when the engine dies is you want to make sure you pull the throttle back in case if something catches back up to you, and then use your feet to maintain control. When you do go to slow the aircraft down, you're going to want to pull back on the elevator and apply brakes smoothly, but do not black up the tires. All right, let's go ahead and give it a try. Accelerating up to full speed, and let's go ahead and kill that engine. So we're ready to take off, engine dies. So we're going to pull it back, and we're going to smoothly pull back at the same time as try to maintain directional control. Again, the elevator's pulled all the way back towards me, and there's the generator fault. Don't jam on your brakes too hard, because if they lock up unevenly, you're going to run yourself into a situation where that happens. Now, that's a relatively straightforward kind of situation. Let's go ahead and refly that one again. But now we're going to go ahead and see what happens if the engine fails after you've left the ground. Now things get a little bit more serious. The key trick to losing engines, of course you never want to lose them, is if you do lose the engine after you've already left the ground, don't pull back on the stick. The trick there is to go ahead and push the nose back down and try to go ahead and land yourself safely back on the runway. So I'm going to go ahead and smoothly apply full power one more time. Aircraft is going to pick up plenty of speed, and we're just going to pretend like we're doing a normal takeoff here. Go ahead and pull the controls towards us just a little bit. Aircraft lifts off the ground. Again, this is why you want to make sure you don't bring your landing gear up, and engine failure. So the first thing we want to do is we want to push the nose down, bring ourselves back down to the ground, then start to pull our nose up to land it. Do not try to bring the plane down by pulling back, because you're simply going to run out of energy here. And as you can see, we had plenty of energy to bring ourselves back on the ground. If you try to pull up, you're just going to create a lot of drag, and it's going to make it very difficult to get yourself back down on the ground. So that was a pretty straightforward one as well. It's a great thing to go ahead and practice. It's going to get you very familiar with it very quickly. Now, what happens when the aircraft is already significantly airborne when you lose your engine? Let's go ahead and take a look at that next. So I'm going to smoothly apply full power. We're going to go and take off like we did all the other times. As usual, when we get to about 90 knots, go ahead and pull back on the stick. When you feel the nose start to leave off the ground, start pushing the stick back forward, and what's going to happen is you're going to find just the right sweet spot where the aircraft comes up. As usual, we're going to leave the landing gear down until we get a little bit of altitude. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do what they call the impossible turn. We're going to run into a situation where during the climb, the engine decides to suddenly cut out on us and bring us back to the ground. So we're going to go ahead and pretend we're doing a standard climb here. I'll go ahead and reduce my power to 82% there. We'll leave at full throttle just for kind of the purposes of getting us out to altitude. And when you try this maneuver, make sure you're at least 1,000 feet above the field. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my landing gear. Again, I'm pretending everything's perfectly normal. There's nothing worried about. I don't have to be, things are going well. Again, it looks like it's going to be another relaxing flight here, during the winter time. And the engine fails. The first thing you want to do is push the nose down. Do not build up. Do not try to pull back. You've got to keep your energy high. We can always fix other problems later. So now what we're going to do is we're going to turn the aircraft around. Again, keep that energy going. Don't touch your landing gear. Don't touch your flaps until you're committed. So in this case, we're more than close enough to the runway. It looks like a perfectly comfortable taxiway for us. I'm going to go ahead and drop everything. Flaps are down. Gear is down. Again, keep that nose down. Now we're simply going to pull up. Again, remember the wind's against you. Bring the down to the ground nice and smoothly. And we're going to gently apply our brakes. Now, in this particular case, so you probably noticed it landed on the taxiway as opposed to the runway. Depending on how much room you have underneath you is going to dictate how aggressive you can be with that particular maneuver. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at another variation on this one. What happens if your engine fails when you're already in the traffic pattern? All right, now things get a little more interesting. So now we're already airborne. Now you can see you've got the runway basically right over there on the left. We're coming in on a left traffic pattern. So whenever you lose your engine in the traffic pattern, your goal is going to be to set yourself up in a situation where you can get yourself as close to the ground as you can and as close to the runway as you can. The farther away you drift away, the more energy it's going to take to get yourself back into position. So let's go ahead and unpause the simulation here. Get everything basically set up. Pretend we're basically doing a regular old run here. Give myself a little bit of throttle. I need that level. There we go. And we're just pretending we're doing ourselves a landing. We're a little far out, but that's perfectly fine. Smoothly increase our power here. It looks pretty good. We'd normally be about, let's say, 82% or so, which looks pretty good. Engine temperatures are looking awesome. Again, that's a great advantage to winter here. We're just kind of cruising around. We're kind of far away, kind of far away. Now, when your engine dies in this aircraft, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to immediately kill the fuel. But in this case, we're just doing simulated engine failures in case we really kind of muff things up kind of a thing. So I want to be kind of careful here. Just cruising around, cruising around, cruising around. Everything seems to be perfectly fine. Again, in emergencies, you do whatever you need to do to get yourself on the ground. Now, in this aircraft, 160 is the magic speed for glides. In the event that it dies, that's the speed. And engine failure. First thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and suck a little bit of energy out of the airplane to create a little bit of altitude. And now we're going to start gliding. Now, we want to immediately turn towards the airport, get our speed as close to 160 kilometers per hour as we possibly can, and we're going to leave it there. Don't put your flaps down. Don't put your landing gear down. Keep yourself as close to that 160 as you can possibly get. Remember, no engine right now. So if you start to slow down, pull the nose up, push the nose down. If you start to speed up, pull the nose up. Keep it as close to 160 knots as you possibly can. Now, normally, if this were an actual engine failure, we go ahead and secure the engine. We'd want to make sure we shut off the magnetos. We'd also want to shut off the fuel handle as well. In this case, this isn't a real engine failure. This is a regular one. So I'm noticing that the aircraft is drifting away, and I notice I'm starting to pick up a losing speed here. So I'm just going to push the nose down, and we're simply going to glide our way down to the airport. And you can see we don't pull back. Resist the urge to pull back. If you start pulling back on your controls, what's going to happen is you're going to run into a scenario where your aircraft is going to run out of energy long before. Remember, you need just a little bit of energy to be able to lift the nose up. Complicating things for us today, of course, is that we have a full tank of gas. So taking a look out the window, it's very clear to me that we are not going to be able to get to the airport. Don't pull back thinking you can get free lift. In this case, we're actually going to have to go ahead and do an off-field landing. Don't touch the landing gear or the flaps until you get yourself a lot closer. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom. I see a little bit of an opening. Remember, anytime you turn the aircraft, you're going to be losing a significant amount of energy. I'm starting to get a little slow here, but that's okay. All right, we're committed. We're going to get over the top of those buildings between that tree right there. I'll go ahead and put my landing gear down. We're going to push that nose down. We're going to go between the power lines. Don't flare until the last second. And we are down. That is an off-field landing right there. I'll try to get between the power lines. Easy on the brakes. Easy on the brakes. And we are safe. So in this particular case, we were a little too far away from the airport in order to safely put this thing down on the ground. Again, that was a simulated engine failure. Had that been an actual engine failure, things would have been a little more complicated. And you can see my landing gear collapsed when we finally did get ourselves down onto the ground. So it's an interesting scenario, but this is an excellent aircraft, and it's actually pretty durable. And we did actually strike the propeller, although it looks like we got awfully close. So that is something you want to be prepared for at any time. You're going to be losing engines all the time. So let's take a look at a slightly different kind of emergency. So this time we're going to look at something that happens slightly differently. So one thing that's important to practice, because like I said, you're going to be taking battle damage. You got to kind of get used to this. I'm going to jump to the back seat of the airplane real fast, and I'm going to look down at all the cool instrumentations here that we have. And one of the cool things we have is this little switch panel over here. What this does is this breaks things. This is pretty fun. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and turn the system on. I'm going to disable my airspeed indicator. So let's go ahead and jump up in the front seat and see what does that actually look like for us, and how do we know we've lost our airspeed indicator. Let's go ahead and kill the brake, go ahead and apply full power nice and smoothly, and we'll get racing down the runway like we always do. Now I notice immediately my airspeed indicator is not working. So in this particular case, this would not be a good idea to go ahead and take off. But let's say we wanted to take off anyway, or we're always committed. So fortunately for us, we've set our trim in such a way that we can feel exactly when we have authority for the aircraft. So now I'm going to go ahead and get this thing going. Go ahead and bring up the landing gear after we've gotten a little bit of ground underneath us. And now we are on our way once again. So we have no airspeed indications at all, which makes it very, very difficult to predict what we're doing to this particular aircraft. The good news is that we still have an attitude indicator, which tells us more than enough information as far as knowing exactly what our angle is. We also know what our power is. Knowing those two combined can give us a pretty rough idea of what the airspeed aircraft is actually achieving. So I'm going to go ahead and immediately reduce ourselves down to about 82%, which is our maximum continuous. I'll go ahead and back my throttle back out as well, get us in this particular position. And now I can actually be able to roughly guess how fast I'm going based on what my vertical speed is. So in this case, I'm getting about 2 meters per second here. My nose is up at about 7.5 degrees. That's going to give you a speed of, if you were to take a look here, about 133 knots, which is actually pretty smooth. The other thing you can feel too is how sensitive are your controls. If your controls are very sensitive, it means you're going quick. If your controls get very, very slow, it means you're going slow. The other thing worth knowing is if I look out the nose of the plane here, I have a pretty good idea of where the nose is relative to the horizon. If it's doing one of these kind of things and the plane's buffeting, chances are you're starting to get a little on the slow side. So even without the airspeed indicator, it's not game over for us. It just makes things a little bit more complicated. Now on the real plane, of course, we can hear how windy it is, and that would be one of the greatest indications of what our speed is. Now to make this kind of fun, of course, let's say we go ahead and level the aircraft off here. Push the nose over, go ahead and set ourselves up to a pretty standard cruise. We'll do 75 and bring this back to 75. Even though I don't know my airspeed, if I know what my cruise power settings are, I can actually estimate pretty accurately how fast I'm going. In this case, you can see we're doing about 134 knots, which is a nice, reliable cruise, which is, again, another reason why it's so valuable to know so much about the aircraft that you're flying. So we've got ourselves all trimmed out. Obviously, no airspeed indicator, but no problem. Let's jump out in the back seat. We'll go ahead and put the airspeed indicator back on. Notice the guy in the back seat knew what the airspeed was the whole time. That's not fair. And this time, let's go ahead and disable the attitude indicator. Now, this is interesting because depending on exactly how the attitude indicator has been processed, there are different indications that the attitude indicator has actually failed. In this particular case, I'm noticing when I rotate the aircraft, it seems to have a little bit of a delay to it, but that's perfectly normal. There's nothing actually wrong with that. It's when it starts to do a little dance or its indications don't make sense. So for example, if I were to push my nose down a little bit, I can see that I've got a vertical speed of about 0. I can see my regular airspeed pretty clearly. I can see everything else pretty nicely. I actually need to close this for the first time ever. This never happens. There we go. And everything seems to be okay. Again, it seems to be all right. Now, if I wanted to, I could actually come in here. I could cage this. And now it's absolutely worthless to me. So I'll go ahead and release it again. You can see it catches up real fast. Jump back in the back seat. We'll take a look. And now we can see that the attitude indicator is still working. So interesting. So apparently this is a very, very slow attitude indicator kind of a moment here. But I'm not going to worry about it too much. The key thing is if you do have an attitude indicator failure, you still know if you're going up or down based on this instrument. And you still know if we're turning based on this instrument here, as well as this little needle that keeps bouncing back and forth. So even though that's out of commission, I can still do a pretty good job of estimating what's going on with the aircraft despite that new delay. So now let's go ahead and disable the other instrument and see what happens. Now what we've done is we've disabled our little instrument on the right, which unfortunately that switch does not seem to be working properly for us today because it's still showing no problem with it going on left and right. But basically if we were to lose this instrument, we'd still have a pretty good idea of what's going on because we could always look at this one. If we start picking up speed, that usually means that you're in a dive. If you start losing speed, that usually means you're in a climb, assuming you haven't done anything to your power settings. And of course, if we still have the ball here, we can still reliably put this right in the center and have a pretty good idea of what the aircraft is actually doing. In this case, you can see my vertical speed indicator is totally toast here. So that did work, but unfortunately the little left-right needle there still works. So if we need to determine whether or not we're climbing, we can actually look at our speed, or we can look at our altitude. In this case, you're noticing my altitude is slowly coming up. So if I push the nose down just a teeny tiny bit, give it a moment, you can see we're losing a little bit of altitude. Pull up just a little bit. Airspeed's slowing down. But you can see that my altitude is staying constant. So even though I don't have a reliable vertical speed indicator, I still have a fairly good idea of what the aircraft is doing. Now, if you want to go to nightmare mode, now things get a little more exciting. So the only instrument that we have that reliably works at this time is going to be our altitude indicator. So this is pretty much the worst possible situation that you're in. But the good news is we at the very least have a compass on board, which will let us know which direction we're facing. This ball right here, which tells us if we're slipping, always works. And as long as our altimeter is still working, we still know whether or not we're going up or down. This, of course, would be a super ultra emergency situation if it were to happen to us in the real world. But lucky for us, that will not happen. Typically, when you're flying a mission, the most common thing you'll lose is all your electronics, and you'll be relying on this pretty heavily as far as determining all sorts of directions. So now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and turn all that back on, get back in the back seat here. Flip everybody back off. And now what we're going to do is simulate what's going to happen if we have an engine fire. Now, engine fires are pretty scary because on the jets, that typically means you're about to explode. No kidding. So it's something we need to practice for a lot. Basically, if we have an engine fire, the first thing we're going to be interested in to do is shutting off the fuel supply to the engine. And then we want to try to build up as much airspeed as we possibly can. Afterwards, of course, we want to kill the generator, and we want to go ahead and get ourselves in a glide situation and land as quickly as possible. So we'll go ahead and pretend that the engine is caught fire, a bunch of fire is oozing out of this particular cowling. We want to shut off this. We want to shut off this immediately. We want to pop off these. Again, you don't want any source of electrical energy. And we're going to go ahead and get ourselves ready for our particular glide situation. Bring the nose up, feather the prop the best we can. Again, 160 kilometers per hour, and now we are in what are we going to do sort of a situation. Now, one strategy I've seen people try to do is try to pull the nose up very aggressively, try to get the engine to stop windmilling here. That's a really ideal situation, but of course, if we stall, there's no recovery. So you have to be very, very careful of that possibility as well. There's really no benefit to trying to do that. And it's stopped. Hey, look at that. So now we have a not feathered prop. It's just sort of sitting there chilling. Let's go ahead and get our landing ready. Remember, we have no instrumentation now. Nothing's moving. So we're stuck on using our compass here. But as long as we get our speed at about 160 kilometers an hour, we're pretty safe. At this point, we need to get our landing gear ready. We have an emergency system over here for getting them down. Remember, you don't have electronic landing gear anymore. So if I just sort of mangle the G key a bunch of times, nothing happens. Oh, nope. In this case, they do work. Never mind. They're gravity locked. Well, we can't get them back up. Obviously, you want to save your landing gear to the last possible second, but once they're down... Oh, look at that. That's right. They're pneumatic. Never mind. I misspoke. They're pneumatic. We're fine. All right. We now need to find ourselves a nice, safe place to land. We're doing about 160 kilometers per hour. Yeah, it looks about right. I'm liking that spot right there. This kind of looks like a little bit of a road. I'm kind of staring at it right now. So I'm just going to kind of make my way over to it. Again, no landing gear, no flaps until the last possible second. You want to make sure you're committed. Those flaps in this particular aircraft are split flaps, so they're going to have a tendency to go ahead and kill you quickly. As far as creating extra drag, I mean. All right, let that nose come down. Again, we're pretty light right now. Don't put the gear down until you are absolutely committed. Put them in the neutral position. Lift the nose up. Again, we got plenty of energy. I'm not going to do anything. Don't drop them into the last possible second. It is very quiet in this plane without that propeller moving. Nose comes down a little bit. Then goes up a little bit. Again, 160 is the sweet spot. That's probably a stream, actually. I don't want to land on that. All right, getting low, getting low. Gear down. Flaps down. Remember, as soon as you put those flaps down, you're going to have to nose over, otherwise you're going to run out of energy. A couple feet off the ground, nose up. Hold that nose up if you can, and now smoothly apply the brakes now that we've had to do an off-field landing. Now, when you do that inside of the F-16, you're going to explode. It is much more recommended to simply eject. All right, hopefully this video series has been helpful as far as giving you a rough idea of some of the basics of DCS, so you can be kind of familiar with what you're going to probably expect. The next set of videos, of course, is going to be dedicated completely to flying the intermediate trainer, which is the C-101. And again, you can get a free trial of that for about 2 weeks. And the whole idea with the C-101, of course, is to give you guys an idea of sort of the intermediate, more challenging levels. But again, this is a really, really fun airplane to play with and totally worth it if you just kind of like to tool around. Enjoy.